Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you. I'm excited to talk to you today about being more conscious with our women. And I feel like one of the ways that you, right off the bat, opened my mind and opened my awareness and my consciousness and did a real paradigm shift was in your next level situational awareness, next level becoming aware of your woman's cycle. First of all, I'd like to hear how and when and why that started for you, because I know that goes back quite a number of years. And what led you to do that? And how did this all begin?
It's actually a pretty good story. So I started tracking Dawn's cycle in the spring of 2020. And I've kept track of it every single day since then. So we're going on 4.5 years of every single day, keeping a spreadsheet that is thousands of lines long now. But the reason that I originally started doing it was because I wanted to get a better handle on when she was going to have her period so that I could plan things for our life when she didn't have her period. We were looking ahead at some travel, some vacation, some fun, planning some dates. And it was like, if I kept better track of this, I could have a better idea of when it was going to be there. And we wouldn't end up in those situations where you plan a really cool trip and she's miserable because she's bloated and in pain the whole time. That was why I got started doing it. The things I've learned from it have been far more than that. That's still one of the most valuable and best reasons to start, is just to have that basic awareness of when is she actually going to have her period? When is she going to be on that bleed part of her month? Because it's a normal, natural part of what makes her a woman. Mm-hmm.
And when you say you keep track of it, tell me about how do you keep track of it? What does it exactly look like?
That's evolved a lot. So at the beginning, it was really just a matter of writing down the day that she got her period. For a while, it was just that. Like, I started paying attention to how long the cycle was and when the next one came. Started getting some general idea of how many days is it and how does it change. So at first I was really just keeping track of when she got her period. Then as I started doing that, becoming more situationally aware, I started noticing like, oh, hey, there's some real consistent patterns here with like how her mood evolves and shifts through the month. So over time, I noticed as I was paying attention, oh, she got her period today. Okay, now her period is over. And I started just noticing trends of, oh, hey, interesting. She's been in a better mood at this time of the month. Oh, she's been a little bit more reserved or lower energy or crabby at certain different points in the cycle. So I started keeping track of that. I started at the next thing I added was keeping track of her mood. Mm-hmm. And I just gave it a simple like 0 to 10, 0 being like ultimate crabby mode and 10 being like the ultimate bubbly happy. And I just gave it a subjective score of how I noticed her mood throughout the month. And what that eventually then I started getting more curious and paying attention to things like how her libido changed, how her sleep changed, how affectionate she was with me, and how that changed. So now I keep track of a variety of different things. And sometimes, like sleep, for example, I kept track of how her sleep changed through her cycle for a couple of years. Noticed that it really didn't. That it was actually, for her, it didn't seem to really change consistently with any part of the cycle. So I stopped keeping track of that. But as time goes and I just get curious about new things, then I'm able to very easily just add in. I have the most complex spread. I've learned a lot about how to build really complex spreadsheets. I got to have like 50 different pages on this one because I make a new page for each cycle and then copy and paste it into the next month. But
what did you learn? Go ahead.
So now the other thing, the most recent thing that I added was really a couple of years ago now, was having her take her basal body temperature in the morning, which is what a lot of people do when they're trying to track fertility and ovulation. It's very helpful for that, but it also is very helpful in seeing a lot of the different trends around the cycle. As we get older, as women get older, eventually they start to shift into perimenopause where they aren't ovulating every month. And when we have her taking her temperature every morning, she texts it to me in the morning when she gets up. Then I enter it into the spreadsheet. And one of the long run beneficial things here will be, we'll know the very first time that she doesn't ovulate in a cycle. Because it's very obvious when you keep track of basal body temperature when she's ovulated. That's also a really good thing to know, if not just if you're looking to try to get pregnant or to try not to get pregnant, but if you want to plan something when she's going to be at her highest mood, at her highest libido, at the most likelihood of her being very energetic. And you can know about the time window when she's in her ovulation phase. You can hit the nail on the head with giving yourself really good experiences in how you plan and lead.
I think let's just pause for a moment, and I want to come back to asking you questions, but I think it'd be good for a lot of those guys out there that are listening, and girls that may be not aware of what the different stages in the cycle are. I wonder if you could just take a moment to define. I think it's helpful to define terms. You said ovulation, and just define maybe just what's a menstrual, ovulation, luteal, and follicular. Just those four terms I think would be helpful.
Yeah. So everybody knows the menstrual cycle. That's the part that everybody pays attention to and thinks about, but that's not the only part of every. She's evolving hormonally all the way through the month. And so after her menstrual cycle is over, she shifts into what's called the follicular phase. And this is where the egg is being formed and released. Now, I'm not a doctor and I don't know the exact medical terms for all of these. I'm saying it as I understand it, which is good enough for the purpose that I'm doing here. So the follicular phase post-menstrual cycle is when she is her body's preparing to release an egg from the ovary. The ovulation is when the egg is released from the ovary, and that is a shorter period of time. That is marked with some very major shifts in her hormones. And then the luteal phase is what happens once the egg reaches the uterus. I'm making sure that I get my terms as correct as I can here. But when the egg reaches the uterus, and if it is not fertilized when it lands there, then she enters into a luteal phase, which is another major shift in hormones. And generally then is on a slide back towards the menstrual cycle, where her body will shed and release that egg and everything that it did to prepare for if she was pregnant. And the biggest reason to understand all these terms is because as men, we wake up every morning and we're roughly the same hormonally. And we go through a cycle, a 24-hour cycle in our internal body's hormonal experience that resets overnight, and then we're back to the same again the next day. And we are generally the same every day. She is different hormonally every single day throughout her cycle, from the day that her bleed starts all the way through the day that the next one starts. Every single day in there, she wakes up in a different internal hormonal state than she was the day before.
She's literally a different person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to think of it as we are solar in the sun. Like we go
mm-hmm.
by the sun, and she's lunar. She goes by the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We have a solar cycle. She has a lunar cycle. The world works on a solar cycle. Everything works in the same, the world works as it is now, reflected on the way the men work. She's trying to fit within the men's world. So if she's got some challenge, any woman that succeeds in a men's world is having to overcome her natural biology to do so. I would love to go back, though, to what you were stating about what you've learned. You didn't tell me what you've learned. You just said you learned a lot. And I would love to hear some of what you've learned, more so than just when the monthly dates and things like that. What have you learned? Can you make broad generalizations around like the follicular period or the luteal? Are they different, and how are they different?
So you can make some broad generalizations, but I think the biggest thing that I learned comes back to what we were just saying before, which is she's not the same every day. And
Are there patterns, though?
Oh, there certainly are, and I'll get to that. But I think the thing that I learned, that I had to learn the most for myself, is I only know life as I've always known it, which is I wake up every morning and I feel the same. And my expectation all the way up till I really started paying attention to this was that when she woke up every morning, that she also was the same. Mm-hmm. And her expectation was that she should feel the same mm-hmm. every morning when she wakes up. So the biggest thing that I learned was that's not true. And she also then learned, oh, this is actually normal. So she's learned through my tracking. We can probably come back to that. But in the different phases, and I'll talk about my experience and what I've learned about Dawn. But the more important thing here is every single woman is going to be a little different in this. And so mm-hmm. you can't just take the experience that I'm talking about here and apply it to every woman. And we also can't reduce her to just being like this on this day. Mm-hmm. This isn't a reductionist thing. This is really an awareness thing. Why I like your situational awareness. But generally, during the follicular phase, she's going to be coming more out of her shell. Energy levels are going to be coming up after the period is over. Ovulation, she's going to be at her highest energy, her highest libido, her most just overall vivaciousness. Mm-hmm. Luteal phase is really just what I think most men and a lot of women call PMS, which is really just a major hormonal shift mm-hmm. in her body. So in our case, marked by decreasing levels of energy, decreasing mm-hmm. interest in sex, decreasing interest in social engagement and socialization in general for Dawn. And then the period itself is, for her, the first few days are very low energy. And then the second half of the period is when she starts to come out of the low energy phase. So the luteal is like a slide. It's like a slow, gradual slide all the way down to the bottom. Mm-hmm. And then we're at the bottom for a few days. And then we start to emerge back out of that.
And I think when you say you've learned, these patterns hold up, like whether this is Dawn But what you just said also applies from my experience with Rachel.
Mhm.
And one of the things that it's been most helpful for me, though, I'd like to go back to this notion of that there is difference throughout the month and that's normal. And to move away from the idea of pathologizing, to say that somehow that you're wrong or that you're bad or that something's wrong with you, that you even have a luteal phase or that you have menstrual or that this part of us having a death phase in our, and for men, we can't relate to something like this that's built into our body. It's so foreign to us. It's so foreign to our psyche to have something that's unavoidable within us that we cannot control that happens to us every month that lowers our chi, lowers our energy, lowers our life force. And then we have to counteract that constantly. It's like building this resistance to us. And I think it's, for me, done so much to, first of all, to bring awareness to this and then to recognize and have compassion. Oh my God, this is what you go through. This is what all women go through. And to see then how the structures of our culture and our society pathologize that and turn it into something that's wrong or bad or less than. And I think the first step is just seeing that it happens. And the second step says, how can we structure our life to support? Yeah, we can't change all of society, but we can at least start to change the way we do our life. And
Mhm.
I can start to change the way that I am unconsciously adding things to you. Or even if you are going through this, that I can have awareness that you're going through it of these different states. And I can be able to be supportive of you in these states if we keep, and that's huge. And that's a huge start to this. I would love for you to speak about some of the things that you've done to make adjustments for this, to allow for these different stages,
Mhm.
and what you've done to lead her in those areas.
A big one stands out. The word compassion that you used is a really important thing here, because this has given me a lot of compassion for just what's real for her. And she didn't have this compassion for herself either. And that
Mm-hmm.
played out more than anywhere in the way that she pushed herself in her workouts. She would bust her ass in the gym and not pay any attention at all to where she was at in her cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And then she would get really down on herself because sometimes she would just not have the energy to go as hard in her workout, and she would beat herself up because she didn't have the same kind of energy or the same kind of strength or the same kind of endurance.
Mm-hmm.
And she would think it was because she ate something wrong, or because maybe she isn't sleeping right, or maybe I'm doing something else wrong. Maybe I must not be doing something right. So inside of our dominant submissive dynamic, where I've taken over writing and planning her workouts now, instead of her having a workout plan that she executes on a weekly basis, where she does like the same kind of workout every Tuesday, I have a plan sketched out over a 30-day cycle that rotates through different types of workouts that are more intense during the follicular and the ovulation phase, and even the beginning, like post-ovulation, early luteal phase. There's
Mm-hmm.
still some intensity to them. But then once she gets into her luteal phase, and especially towards the end of it and into those first few days of her period, now her workouts are not pushing her body in the same way. She's doing more walking, she's doing more yoga, she's doing more gentle cardio and things that are not hard on her nervous system, that aren't hard on her body. So she's pushing herself when her body and her hormones support it, but she's also laying back when her hormones don't support it. So that's one way. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and another one is with our business and with our jobs and the way that we do what we do at Infinite Devotion, with our podcast, with social media, with courses that we teach and everything. Some weeks when, you know, like this week when she's deeper in her luteal phase, I don't schedule a couple of the clients that she meets with me.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I do, they know they're just getting me, because she doesn't show up. She doesn't do I don't have her do the level of work, even though she doesn't have a lot of responsibility in our business. She's still a very valuable piece of it. But when she's in certain parts of her cycle, there's not the expectation for her to push herself through doing things she doesn't have the energy for. So that's just a couple examples.
Have you noticed that? Let's go back to the workout. Have you noticed a difference? I guess it would be good to ask her, but with her body, do you feel like she's changed her relationship with her body? Do you think her body less antagonism towards it? I'd be curious how she would characterize that.
I can speak to it pretty well because it's been an ongoing topic, body image related things for her.
Right.
It's definitely helped her find more compassion for her own body. And then over time, what she's been working through is releasing some of the expectations of perfection that she placed on herself when she was trying to force herself to be what she thought she was supposed to be. That's an ongoing process, and it's a slow one. It's a challenging one, but it is. She's definitely in a place where she has a lot more compassion for herself, and it has started to soften some of the forcefulness she's applied to her expectations of how she's supposed to look.
Right. What are some of the other things that you've learned? Like specifically, are there other patterns and things that you've seen through this?
Good question. One really interesting one is there's a day always right around somewhere between day 22 and 25 of her cycle. So we start with day 1 being the day that her menstrual cycle starts every month. That's day 1. That's how I keep track of it. And then somewhere between day 22 and day 25 is a day where it seems like all hell breaks loose. And I didn't really know why until I listened to a podcast with Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman, where they were talking about the hormonal shifts in women during their cycles. And they talked about this point in the cycle where a woman's estrogen crashes to zero when her body realizes that the egg is not fertilized. And again, don't quote me on this. I'm probably wrong. Don't take medical advice from me. I'm getting more at the emotional concept here than I am about the medical terminology. But she goes through a massive hormone crash when her body realizes that she's not pregnant. And that day used to hit me sideways. Like it would kick my ass. I'd be like, we'd be having a great week, great month, whatever. And then it would just be like, ah! Where did that come from? Oh, her entire hormonal structure of her body changed in 24 hours.
Right.
Like that. Oh, okay. Well, maybe this has nothing to do with me. And then when you know, okay, sometime in the next couple of days, all hell's probably going to break loose and it's not going to be about me. Now, all of a sudden I can see this happening and just go, I got you. Come here.
Right.
Instead of getting upset, triggered, defensive. That's a really powerful shift to be able to make, because those things, if we've talked before a lot about defensiveness. Well, if I'm getting defensive or all of a sudden I'm in resistance to how she's showing up because I didn't expect it, and now I can see it coming a mile away. Oh, and by the way, now, because I've been able to see it and show this to her, now she sees it coming too. And she's, oh, I think I'm having that day. I feel like that day is here. And so
go ahead.
Then it's not even like she's out of control of it. She's just more in acceptance of, okay, yep, here it comes.
I would imagine this has done something for her too, that she's shifted her relationship. You mentioned earlier that she's been more aware with her workouts, more self-compassion. I bet if you were to ask her, about this experience being led by you in these last 4 years, I bet you would mention this, I would imagine.
Well, it's like anything. When you aren't even aware of something, you don't even know it's happening because it's just your normal.
Mm-hmm.
When you can now see the truth and now you know, oh, all of this is normal. This is how things actually, there's nothing wrong with me that I have a whole week of feeling super tired, or, you know, I feel like I'm absolutely over the moon, like giddy, giggly. Like all of this is just a normal thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's helped her just accept herself and not fight against all of how she's feeling so much. And holy shit, what a rewarding thing as a man to be able to bring that kind of compassion to her and reflect that, mirror that to her, and let her start to absorb and feel that way for herself. What a gift to be able to give her.
For sure. And you know what I've found too is it's really helped me to see the relationship and the parallel between the different cycles in my own life. One of the biggest things that I've come to as I've gotten older and in my own work is to see the value of what we might call death processes, or like a rebirth process, the hardships in our life, the challenging moments, the parts that we all, want to judge or condemn or think are really negative. But can we see them as a gift? Can we see them as like real opportunities to gain wisdom? This is par for the course of anybody who's doing an athlete. You want to be challenged to get better at your sport. You want to be challenged and go through these things to become a better man. Well, a woman gets that built into her entire structure all the time, every month. And as a culture, if we allowed women and reframed it for women to say, hey, this is not necessarily, are we going to stop judging this? And can we honor this? And can we allow this time to be a time to gain wisdom and to gain a quiet and what we might be more like a retrograde moment, a reflective moment, a contemplative moment, to come back from those moments. I know Rachel comes back with great wisdom, with great insights, with great truth bombs for me that would not necessarily have been there if she would have just go all the time. And I feel like it really offers and has offered me this contemplation on looking at our world. It's not like we have to do things in a new, completely different way, but can we do things in the both and kind of way? Can we do things that more honor the lunar cycle and more honor the solar cycle? Can we honor the woman and the man? We don't have to make it just one way. And I think for so long we've been myopic and saying this is the way it's got to be, but can we do it in a way that honors both, and it has a bit of honoring the natural rhythms and the natural cycles? And I feel like the more that I've been able to honor her rhythms and her cycles, at least in an awareness of it, we can't always have our schedule coordinated to such a degree, but it has definitely shifted my approach towards her, my compassion towards her. It's definitely even my expectations around sexuality towards her, expectations out in the world. And I can also see how much of her life and how much of her days she's overriding what's natural and doing so much on such a limited amount. And it's impressive, but it also takes a toll. And I feel like it's inhibited her from the full flowering of her out into the world because she's been using all this energy here. Whereas if we could honor the death here, we could have that much more energy over here during the follicular period. And I feel like when she's able to really do a proper luteal or proper menstrual and have that, she comes out into luteal with such more of a launch. When she's not able to really honor the luteal or the menstrual, it almost drags on into the follicular, and she's almost got to do that then, and it impedes the whole thing, and it makes everything a bit lukewarm. And I think so many women, a lot of the women that I've noticed when they deal with hormone imbalances, and a lot of this has to do with just not honoring these cycles and not honoring what's necessary in each of that. And it's not only workouts, but it's also, I've noticed food as another part of this, that she's craving different food during these different periods of time. She's also very craving different types of sex during these different types of the month. And it's almost like she wants a different man during these types of the month. Like, it's got that sort of energy, like different parts of me need to come out and be there. And if I become aware of that and then I can meet that and lead her in that way, then it becomes that much more powerful. And I
Hmm.
think it's been you know, the most massive shift though that I've seen is just like going back to that initial word of situational awareness. If I can always have this in my mind at any time of the month, it's been a go-to for me to be like, oh, it's late luteal. Okay, I know why this is happening. Oh, okay. It's been like day 29, 30. Oh, she hasn't started yet. Oh, maybe there's some stress that's going on here. Oh,
Hmm.
how long was that drag? Okay. And then I can ask questions, or I can be curious, or I can become more aware and then see and then plan and then understand these things. I found it to be massively game changing. And I think, you know, I have not heard of any man other than you talk about this. And it got me interested in looking at it. And it got me interested in looking at post premenopause, perimenopause, and menopause. And it got me noticing and seeing how much of the conversation in our society and culture at large has pathologized this, has made it feel like women have an illness just by being a woman. And I've seen how my mother's generation and other generations before have really hidden things. And it's played out in society at large where all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, this is here. Oh, that's why. And all of a sudden you start becoming aware
Hmm.
of the constructs of our society and think different things that kind of hold women down. And I've become a lot more aware of this, a lot more conscious of this. And as you've been on this journey, I would imagine that it's also given you a lot more awareness and consciousness around this. And I wonder if you have anything more that you want to, just in general, any other reflections on this that you might want to add.
Well, yeah, a big one is as men, a lot of times we're driving, right? We're just always moving, driving, pushing towards some objectives, towards some future place. We're just like, we're always going somewhere and we're busting our ass to get there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've seen in myself has been like when I've started to tune more into her experience, I've learned for myself that, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll just slow myself down a little bit here these next couple days too. Be a little more present with her. Still, like, still being myself, but you mentioned a different version of yourself that needs to be there. Well, it's also helped me have a little bit more compassion for myself and like, okay, you know what? Take a deep breath, like slow down a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and be present with yourself, be present with her. And that's helped me just keep myself recharged too.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, she needs me to some extent to be the same while also giving her permission to be different, to be changing,
Mm-hmm.
to be evolving. So the danger in this, maybe danger's too strong of a word, but the caveat here is to have compassion for her experience and to encourage her to have it, but also not to go all the way into it with her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? She doesn't need me to be on the roller coaster with her all the time. Sometimes she needs me to be like the ground for her. Be like, I see that you're all over the place today. It's okay. Come here. I got you. Giving her something to lean up against, something solid when she's feeling like she's all over the place. If she can accept feeling all over the place and still feel my solidity, feel my strength there to hold and support her in her ups and downs,
Mm-hmm.
that brings a whole different level of polarity into the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Truth. And I think that goes into this idea of one of the big things that I've seen with this. We're saying, I'm about to say the obvious, but it needs to be said. We're different. And I think that, and that different doesn't mean men are better. And I think that's the societies that we've lived in, is we've created a society that like men have an advantage by being men because we live in a society where it's a solar cycled society. not lunar. And so women have to work up against what's innate. But I feel like what's important for us and for me, what I see is, can we have a lot of the problems of our world is it's a one size fits all mindset that's gotten us into a lot of problems. And as we go into a new world that can heal us and that can feel more vital and vibrant for all of us, we're going to need to include the way that women work and not to make women more like men. I feel like that's not what we want. It's not a helpful thing. And I think the differences in hormones make this patently obvious. And I think it's an important just thing to state right away. Like, we're different, and that's awesome that we're different. And let's honor that.
I love women. I love that Dawn is a woman.
Right.
And if I want her to be a woman, I cannot expect her to behave like a man.
Right.
I can't expect her to live like a man, to function like a man, to operate like a man on a 24-hour cycle.
Right.
And when you talk about working against themselves, I want to bring even more clarity to that. Post-industrial revolution, where we have a Western society that is built on a 9 to 5 or some other shift work, wake up, get ready, go to work all day, come home, live the remainder of your life in the evening, go to bed, repeat that every single day, except for the weekends, sometimes, right? That is the solar cycle, so to speak. It's the do the same thing every day, do that all the time, all year long, except for a couple of little vacations, right? That's what we're talking about here. And so for me, when I look at how the world would need to adjust to honor the feminine cycle more, because if a woman is pushing herself into that kind of a corporate job or that kind of a shift work job, whatever it is, no matter what the work is or how much she loves it or how good she is at it, if she has to show up and be the same every single day, when she's not the same every single day on the inside, that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about working against her natural rhythms. So these highly structured work environments work great for men. They reward us, they motivate us, they function on the same body clock, the same way as our body clock does. Mm-hmm. And in order for the world to shift to where it would honor the lunar cycle, to honor the menstrual cycle for women, would need to have a lot more flexibility, with maybe more of the work loaded into the middle of her cycle and less of the workload in the other half of it, in the luteal menstrual cycle phases. And that doesn't work very well with a business or an economy that functions on productivity and smart goals, like breaking everything down into what do we have to accomplish today and this week. It doesn't work very well. So this whole thing involves taking apart the expectation of sameness and really honoring the differentness, honoring the fact that we are opposite from each other. And if we want our women to be women, we have to let them be women.
And, this doesn't mean that you don't produce awesomeness. You
produce differently.
Exactly. And if you look at there's a great book of the habits of artists, and it goes through and it shows how many of them had completely non-linear, non-solar lifestyles. Artists, geniuses, brilliant people, nature itself, all of these work much more seasonally than they do solar. Like, how nature works in a day in August is very different than how it works in a day in April. And to get away from the same. Otherwise, if we model our expectations in our life in a solar, same, efficient model, AI will easily replace humans because they will always become more efficient. They will do what they're told. Robots are here. So we have to change our mindset. And part of the changing of the mindset is to allow for more of a cyclical, more of what I call chaotic, chaos and order coming together. Comes from Dee Hock, who founded Visa. How can we create a company that's based upon a chaos theory? How can we have humans that reflect more of nature and less of machine? And I think women, if we can honor women and women honor us and bring their wisdom and bring what's there, the world, that's the only way I see our world coming into a new epoch in time, is really when we start moving away from just one myopic way of thinking at. And I think what's ironic is here we are talking about leading our women, but it's leading by honoring. It's not leading by controlling or dictating. It's leading, it's joining and leading. It's seeing what's there. It's having the situational awareness to see what the situation is and then lead from the situation, not by wishing the situation was somehow different or ignoring the situation or being unconscious of the situation. Consciousness is situational awareness.
Yeah, and it's dealing with reality.
Yeah.
And all of this is about accepting reality. There's a term in hypnotherapy called utilization, where if we're doing deep subconscious work, we have to utilize what's there rather than working against what's there. We have to be with the reality of what's going on inside of someone's subconscious and work with that. And what we're talking about here really is a similar thing. It's being aware of what's going on in her and working with it. Earlier on in this process, here's one of the pitfalls I fell into that I don't know if you have. I know other guys I've worked with have fell into this one where I went into, okay, I see this cycle. I understand it. I honor it. I value it. I recognize it. I'm learning from it. All of this is making things work a lot better. And then I found myself trying to figure out how I could take all this information and get her back to being the same all the time. Okay. So then and that's where fixing energy comes into play. If I'm still in resistance to or disapproval of the fact that she actually is different every day, which is where I was at the beginning of this, I was understanding it and seeing how different she was. Like, holy cow, this is unbelievable how much is similar from month to month. And after a little bit of time, I found myself thinking, boy, I bet if we just did a couple of these things, then maybe she would be able to level that out. And no, that's actually the opposite. We're not trying to level her out. We're trying to actually enhance her acceptance of her really structured evolution that she goes through.
Right. And how can we see that these things that are we classify as bad or grumpy or moody or or distant or any of these, can they just be let her just be there? It doesn't have to be all warm and overflowing and some sort of feminine oozy gushiness. Sometimes it can be cold and distant and solitude, and that's okay. And not to judge it and not to wish it was different.
In the yin and yang circle, the feminine is represented by the black. She's represented by the dark. And feminine energy is inherently dark. It's not all love and light and rainbows. Feminine energy is inherently dark. That's why chaos gets associated with this. And not chaos always in a bad way, but chaos in a chaotic way. Lots going on, lots of uncertainty, lots of emotion, you mentioned nature, right? Nature is very feminine. It can be very pretty, but it can also destroy. And it needs to destroy. fires are necessary. Things need to burn in order for new life to come. All of this is a part of why we value her feminine nature. Like, we need her to light some forest fires in us.
Mm-hmm.
We need her to burn off the things about us that are impure, that are not clean.
Mm-hmm.
We need to burn down our own egos so that we can regrow in consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we need women in our lives, by the way. This is what men need women for even more than sex. We need them for their transformational power and what they can do for us. But she can't do that if we are acting, or her whole life is acting, to suppress her feminine nature.
Right. And I think it's modeled in this. When you learn the cycle, then you can see it play out, not just during the month, but you can play out in all moments, that there is this cycle. And I think another way of thinking of it is the summer and the fall and the winter and the spring. You know, it goes through, and you can have the same thing where it starts in the late winter, moves into the summer, and then into the fall, and then back
Mm-hmm.
again. And
yeah, because she's blooming, like she's coming alive in that follicular phase and in that ovulation. Like, all the flowers are in bloom and the birds are singing and the leaves are on the trees, and we're like staying up all night partying and having fun. And then in fall, like, everything starts to come back down to earth. And
mm-hmm.
then in winter we go through a death, and then in
Mm-hmm.
springtime we're being born again. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, she is very much like nature in that way. It's also like the tides in the ocean.
And I think if we can see that's just part of life, that's life. And there's always going to be this part of life. And if you can start recognizing that at each stage, there's actually like almost different ethics. There's a different way I need to treat her in the spring. There's a different way I need to fuck her in the summer. There's a different way I need to talk to her. A volume of my voice during the luteal phase. It's not the one size fits all. If I can pay attention to that. And that's not just in these times of the month. It also can happen. Different instances can draw that out in our life. There could be a death of a loved one. There could be a sickness. There could be, an injury. I've just recently gone through a massive injury that's still dealing with. That in many ways has its own luteal phase. We have these different phases in our time. I feel like we can start seeing this on a collective level too. How do people go through these different phases? And during these different phases, we need to be more understanding of that and not think, oh, it's got to be just the follicular all the time. And then we're upset that there's a little bit of that this is actually a menstrual period or a luteal period that's going to have different needs. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. And that there's always going to be another cycle.
Yeah. And when we can be in acceptance of it,
mm-hmm.
we can actually gain the benefit from it,
Exactly.
that it is there, that it has for us.
Exactly.
When she's on fire, when she's feeling very fiery, when she's feeling very, we call it sass in our house, like when Dawn's got all of her sass, if I'm in resistance to it, now we're just fighting. We're just arguing.
Right.
If I'm not in resistance to it and she starts poking me, then I can actually maybe see what it is that she's feeling that's bringing her to feel that need to poke there. And I can see something in it, and there's something there for me. And all of this comes back to something we talked about in a recent episode, by the way, which is momentum.
Right.
When you look at this cycle and you see and accept it for what it is, instead of, probably the biggest benefit in our lives has been the fact that I no longer collapse every single luteal phase because I make it all about myself, because I think something is wrong, or I need to fix something, or I'm pissed and needy because her energy shut down and she's not there for me in the same way that she was a few days ago. Ovulation with Dawn she is giggling, she's laughing, she's horny, she's full of energy, she's dancing, she's like running across the house, like dancing around the house for no reason. It's a party. Like, her life feels like a party, and she is birthday girl and she's having the time of her life. And it is so freaking cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then luteal hit in our house, luteal phase hits like a freight train sometimes. Like, it'll be like, go to bed one night and she can barely fall asleep because she's giggling so hard at something. Wake up in the morning and it's just
right.
So I used to lose my shit. What happened? Where did you go? Before I realized and understood what was actually happening. Now that I can realize and understand what's happening, and I don't lose my shit, now we don't lose momentum. We don't lose connection. We just accept that this is where we are and we flow with it. And then because I'm not falling apart in her luteal phase, because she's not how I think she should be, then when she starts to come out of it, we aren't trying to repair something that's broken, because she was never broken. I was just breaking because I was expecting her to be the same when she's not.
Right.
And so now we can maintain momentum. We can keep growing together. We aren't having to repair my own collapse.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that double, it's such a momentum of her, of you seeing her. When you're able to hold her in those moments, then on the other side of those moments, boy, does she really feel that and recognize that. And it's just a microcosm of the bigger moments in her life where she can go through that. I feel like this whole experience, you mentioned having more compassion for yourself of this, and I spoke a little bit to that, but I feel like it's really been this beautiful, life-changing experience for me. I feel like in many ways, it has been the defining difference in my life since really taking on a commitment to leading her and showing responsibility for all of her. And so much of it starts there. If I'm not doing that, I'm not doing it. Like, you can't be to call it a 24/7, even that has the mindset of the man. That's like a solar cycle. It's defined in the day. It should be called like a 28 something or a 30 or a lunar. Like, we're so in the day, and it's not about the day, it's about the month. It's about seeing the cycles and seeing and getting the situational awareness. And I feel like that it's a change in paradigm. And I think that word paradigm is really important, because I feel like until you go through a paradigm shift, it's really like the death of an ego. It's a death of a former version of yourself. It's not a paradigm shift if your worldview doesn't change and it doesn't disrupt things, and you start seeing things differently all the way around, and you start connecting the dots. And it's not like you have necessarily more answers. In many ways, you have more questions, but at the very least, you have a lot more awareness, a lot more consciousness. And that's where the awareness and consciousness really go hand in hand. And that situational awareness is actually derived from enhanced consciousness. And to be a conscious dominant is really to have more situational awareness. They go back and forth with each other. And a lot of that stems from compassion, because when we start to have compassion for the moment, our heart stays open. We don't close it. And as when we're in a compassion, we can see things, and whatever the right thing to do can happen quicker, because we're not letting something impede us from doing it. Some predetermined judgment. We'll make the decision that is the right decision in the moment. It stems from our heart, and it stems from love.
I think the last thing that really has to be said here is the impact of birth control. And with how many women are on some form of chemical or physical birth control, meaning the pill, meaning any sort of implant or shot or chemical IUD, any of these things. And even to some extent, the copper IUDs, different, but still making an impact. Any of these sorts of interventions into her hormonal cycle, they act to try to eliminate these different cycles, these different phases, and to keep her more the same. And we've worked with a number of women who have gotten off of their pills and off of their chemical birth control and started tracking their cycle and paying attention to their cycle and using that as their method of recognizing when they can and can't get pregnant, and when they need to be more careful or abstain from at least the kind of sex where they could get pregnant. But the utilization of chemical birth control will essentially erase everything we've talked about here today. It makes it all a moot point. And the fact that these pills and chemicals are used to suppress the natural hormonal cycle of women is a part of the problem of women not being able to be in their natural cycle. It is I think the antidote to needing these pills for birth control or for hormonal regulation is acceptance of the body and of the cycle, and coming out of resistance to it, but instead coming into acceptance of it. And just that acceptance probably helps to calm the nervous system to some extent, to maybe for the people who use pills and implants and shots and whatever to manage the hormones and the hormonal swings. I believe to some extent coming to acceptance of the cycle instead of resistance to it probably makes some impact on the need to use those chemicals to manage the hormones.
I think we've talked about this before too. And I think another part of this is that how much a lot of what you and I have done is we've taken, and for Dawn and for Rachel, to see that how much of their life has been where they've let society at large dominate them. And how are we moving away to replace society as the dominant role in their life and move to become the dominant role? And I think when women are using the pill, they're letting society, they think they're liberating themselves from society, but in many ways, they become that much more a part of the machine of society where one size fits all, we can just go become like a guy, do what we want to do, however we want to do it, not need anyone, just move through and be just among the masses and that way. And what is it to surrender, to be in your cycle? What is it to actually be in touch with your femininity? Is to actually be in touch with another man who is aware and is conscious of your femininity, and for the two of you to grow together, where you become a word of wisdom to him, where he can grow, and you become someone who's aware of you and your needs and honors your femininity, so that you then can surrender to him and not surrender to society at large, not surrender to the machine that's out there that wants to turn you into just a cog, to turn you into something that just fits into the machinations. But to find yourself and to become an individual literally actually means by surrendering yourself to someone else who cares about you as an individual and wants you as an individual and all of your unique manifestations. And that's the paradox of it, but that's what I found to be true. And I think that's what Rachel would say, the same thing.
And all of this to say, by the way, if a woman wants to go about her life that way, by all means do it. Yeah, this is what we've learned in our experience, in what is a different route for the people who are maybe like, this, whatever is happening in my life isn't working for me and I want to try something different. Maybe try honoring and respecting and appreciating what nature has created in a woman and why it's there, rather than resisting it or trying to shut it down. It's a different approach, and it's made a massive difference in Dawn's life and in mine.
And there might be a time in your life, I know for Rachel, there was a time where she, you can have different approaches to this. So this has not necessarily been what has to be all the time. But when the situation allows for a woman to honor her cycle and have a man to honor it with her, there's been great benefit. And I appreciate you, Andrew, for being an example of that and showing me that it can be done, and showing different ways that you've done that. So it's meant a lot to me. It's really helped me be so much better with Rachel. So I see it as a real testament to this. So thank you.
It's my pleasure, and I hope this podcast touches at least one or two other guys out there, or hopefully lots of them, who can maybe find a different approach for themselves too.
Sounds good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Andrew.